there are going to be people who don't like your ideas, don't like your direction. They're going to feel like you shouldn't be doing it, or you should be doing it a different way, or you should do it at a different time, or they could tell you how to do it better if you would just do it their way. It's always going to come. People love to criticize those who are trying to accomplish something. Have you noticed that? Usually, it's people who aren't accomplishing anything who like to criticize those who are trying to accomplish something. Ian mentioned the Super Bowl is tonight, and go whichever team you want to win. That's fine with me, whichever one you choose. Hope they win. I can tell you something that will happen tonight, though. If you're watching the Super Bowl and you're kind of keeping up with the social media conversations that are going on Facebook or Twitter or wherever you do your social media, here's what I can promise you is going to happen. There will be overweight, out of shape men who are eating chicken wings, who haven't played sports since 7th grade, telling you everything that Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes are doing wrong. This will happen, right? Hashtag Super Bowl criticism. They will be telling you everything that arguably the greatest quarterback to ever play in the NFL is going to do tonight, and the newest up-and-coming young quarterback of the NFL, they're going to tell you everything that they're doing wrong tonight. And trust me, if Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes are subject to criticism, you're going to be subject to criticism in your life. There are going to be people who don't like the way you do things. People will always have an opinion about how you're doing things. And many people share those opinions freely. If you can't manage criticism, if you don't get a hold on how do I anticipate the criticism of other people, you're just not going to accomplish anything, because that's always going to hold you back. We're in the story of Nehemiah. If you're just joining us, it's an Old Testament story. It's a couple of books before the book of Psalms. And we've been studying how Nehemiah has gone back to Jerusalem. He's helping them rebuild from kind of a catastrophe that happened 150 years before, helping them rebuild the wall around Jerusalem so that they are safe and protected, and so that God is honored in the way that they are living, in the way that they are representing Him. Criticism of Nehemiah starts really early. It actually started in chapter 2. We skipped over it because I knew we were going to come to it again in chapter 4. But to kind of give us the context, let's jump back to Nehemiah chapter 2. Nehemiah has come to town. He's getting his plan together for how to rebuild the wall. This is verse 10. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about this, they were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. Sanballat and Tobiah, we're going to hear their names often throughout the rest of the story. They are leaders, governors of regions close by, surrounding Jerusalem, so other cities, other regions. They're the leaders of those regions, and they are disturbed, the Bible says, that Nehemiah has come to promote the welfare of the Israelites, which just on its own sounds like a pretty good thing, right? If you hear of somebody and their goal is to promote the welfare of a group of people, that sounds like a really good thing, and yet these two governors are disturbed, right? Which proves the point I want to make, which is this: no matter how noble your intentions, someone will always criticize you. You see, sometimes we convince ourselves that, no, everybody's going to see this as a great thing. Exactly. And somebody's still going to criticize you. Like, no matter how noble your goal, your aspirations, your project, your end result, there are no goals so noble that some people can't find a reason to criticize them. If you said today that your goal in life is to find the cure for cancer, somebody would criticize that before the end of the day. They would find a reason why you shouldn't do it. So from the very beginning, when Nehemiah gets to town, there are already detractors. There are already people criticizing what he's going to do and how he's going to do it. Let's skip down to verse 19 into verse 18. Nehemiah, if you were here a few weeks ago, Nehemiah has just rallied all the people. Remember, he said, we all see the broken down walls. Now let's do something about it. He's just given them that rallying cry. This is what happens at the end of verse 18. They replied, all the people that he's rallying, they replied, let us start rebuilding. So they began this good work. There it is again. This is a good thing. They began this good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. What is this you're doing, they asked. Are you rebelling against the king? I answered them by saying, the God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding. But as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to it. Now notice, in verse 10, there's two critics, Sanballat, Tobiah. By the time we get to the end of verse 18, we've added a third critic, which my thesis is critics find each other and run in packs. I don't know if you've experienced this in your life or not. Critics find each other, they run in packs. They're like wolves, right? They can sniff out other negative, critical people, and they just all start grouping up together and criticizing together. They link arms. They all express their disapproval. That's what we're beginning to see against Nehemiah. Now, I think one of the reasons criticism is so easy to fall into, it's so easy to participate in, is because criticism does, if we're honest, make us feel a little superior, right? When we criticize someone or something, there's a little part of us that thinks, you know what, I'm smarter than you because I see all the problems you didn't see. I'm smarter than you because I know how you should be doing it instead of the way you're doing it. I'm smarter than you because I can pick everything apart, and obviously you can't. So let me tell you all of my criticism because I'm smarter than you are. Right? That's one of the seductive aspects of criticism, is it feeds this part of our ego to say, well, I see things you don't see. Well, I'm smarter than you are. Well, I have something to say that you didn't think about. Another thing about criticism and critics. Critics often question our motives. As a matter of fact, that's often where critics start. Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem, they show up in verse 19 and they say to Nehemiah, now what are you really up to? Are you trying to overthrow the king? Are you trying to do something funny here? We know there's something behind all of this. You're not doing this out of the goodness of your heart. There's something else going on. What are your motives? Critics often attack us at the point of motives. Now, one of the reasons that's so successful, and one of the reasons critics keep going back to motive, is because I don't know if you've ever tried it before, but it's almost impossible to prove that your motives are pure. Have you ever tried to do that? Somebody who's questioning your motives, it is almost impossible to get them to see, no, I'm really doing what I said I was going to do. No, I'm really here to help. No, I really have good intentions. It's not like our motives are something we can pull out of our pocket and show somebody. Wouldn't that be nice? Oh, here it is. You can look at it. See, I'm really not trying to do that thing that you think I'm trying to do. Good. I'll put it back away now. Our motives are impossible to see and difficult to prove. It's why it's such an easy form of attack for the critic, because you can't prove that you don't have some other motive. And this is where Nehemiah's critics start. Are you up to something? What are you trying to do? Now, kind of a side warning. People who genuinely want to help others, people who genuinely want to accomplish good things, they've probably already questioned their own motives. I mean, at every step of the process, they've probably already asked, am I the right person for this job? Should I be doing this? Are my motives right? And when a critic attacks your motive, if you're not careful, it'll cause you to begin to doubt. We'll revisit this a little bit later on, but one of the ways that critics get leverage over us is they surface the doubts we already have. Like, I already want to be a person with pure motives, and so when I hear that attack, if I'm not careful, I'll begin to question myself. And those are good questions. We should monitor our motives, because none of us are above our motives kind of getting off track. We should monitor our motives. But here's the thing. There are critics in our life that are going to criticize us about anything. They are always going to criticize. And if you're always giving in to that, if you're always giving ear to the voice of the critic, you're going to be paralyzed and ineffective. You're never going to get to the actual work, to the actual job, because the voice of the critic is going to continue to make you insecure. Here's something we have to remember about the critic. Criticism often says more about the criticizer than about the criticized. Criticism often says more about the criticizer. There's something going on that side than it's saying about you. Sanballat and Tobiah, as I mentioned, they're governors in that region, and they had had all the power up to this point. Like, Jerusalem was weak, and in effect, they could be bullied. They could be intimidated. The wall was down. Jerusalem knew they were in bad shape, which gave power to Sanballat and Tobiah. The reason they're criticizing is because they're starting to lose power. They're starting to lose leverage over that region. If Jerusalem gets its strength back, what's that going to do to us? The problem was not in Nehemiah. The problem was not in the citizens of Jerusalem who were rebuilding the wall. The problem was on the side of the criticizer. And there are times that you and I need to evaluate criticism. Completely understand that. There are times we need to process and ask ourselves, is this real? Is this true? Do I need to think about it? There are times that needs to happen, but we also need to realize that sometimes this is about them. It's not about me. It's not about the project. It's not about what God's called me to accomplish. This is about something that's going on in them. Another thing. Critics rarely go away after their first complaint and often get angrier if their criticism doesn't stop your progress. They rarely just walk away after that first complaint. And if you don't respond, if you don't stop everything, if you don't shut everything down, then they tend to get more emotional and more passionate in their criticism. This is chapter 4. We're going to jump into that now. Chapter 4, verse 1. When Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. When he heard about the plan, he criticized it. Nehemiah chapter 3, if you were here last week, they go to work. Like, everybody's taking a section. Everybody's working shoulder to shoulder. The wall's starting to be rebuilt. So Sanballat shows back up and realizes, well, y'all didn't stop? I told you this was a bad idea. Verse 7. But when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod, see how the group is growing? Right? I told you wolves, they run in packs. It just keeps growing. When Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's wall had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. So just in the first 7 verses of chapter 4, they're angry, they're greatly incensed, they're very angry. Why are they angry? Because they couldn't get Nehemiah to stop with their criticism. They couldn't get him to call off the project. Here's what critics do. Critics expect everything to stop when they complain. Detractors, chronically negative people, they expect, we had this conversation. I told you I didn't like what you were doing. You were supposed to stop at that. And when that doesn't happen, they get angrier and anger. And look, obviously there are right ways to handle critics and poor ways to handle critics. We don't want to inflame their anger. We don't want to make things worse. But at the same time, if you and I stop every time we get criticized, we won't accomplish anything. Nothing will get built. Nothing will get rebuilt. Nothing will get accomplished if every time we hear a word of criticism, we pull back. Let's look again at the beginning of chapter 4. When Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, he said, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are?" Tobiah the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, "What they are building, even a fox climbing up on it would break down their walls of stones." All right, 3 strategies of the critic. Number 1, the critic will try to intimidate you. Number 2, the critic will attack you personally. And number 3, the critic will question your abilities. Let's look at each one of those. The critic will try to intimidate you. Remember chapter 2, Sanballat, Tobiah. Next time, there's 3. Next time, there's a whole group. When we pick it up in chapter 4, they brought the whole army out. Did you notice that? Sanballat said, "In the presence of the army of Samaria." Right? Our initial criticism didn't get you to slow down. Our initial criticism didn't get you to stop, so we're going to bring the muscle. We're going to try to intimidate you now. We're going to bring more people. So imagine you're one of the citizens of Jerusalem and you're rebuilding the wall, and it's one thing to have some of the leaders criticizing you. It's another to look over the wall and there's an army standing in front of you. Right? Critics try to intimidate. Sometimes they try to intimidate by exaggerating their position. Maybe you've been in a situation where someone said, I'm not the only one that feels this way. There are a lot of people who feel like I do. Well, a lot of people are talking to me about this. Well, I've heard that there's a lot of people having conversations. But what is that? That's an attempt to intimidate, right? Because most of the time, a lot of people is them and their 2 friends who keep talking about this topic. But that's what critics do. They want to intimidate. They want to get you to back down. They want to get you to stop. Number 2, critic will attack you personally. Read back through what they said. They ridiculed the workers. They called them feeble Jews. You're never going to accomplish this. You're not capable of accomplishing that. You're incompetent. This is foolish. This is all going to end in a disaster. Their attacks become personal. When you and I don't stop the project because of the voice of the critic, then they begin to attack us personally. And maybe it's happened to you before. If it hasn't, it probably will at some point. Because they're looking for some way, again, to regain their power, to regain their leverage, to be the one calling the shots. And if that means they have to go after you personally, they go after you personally. 3rd thing, the critic will question your ability. They're never going to get this done. There's no way they can build this wall. If a fox jumped on the wall, it would knock the whole thing down. They don't have the ability to do this thing that they want to do. Those are just some of the attacks of the critic. The critic's goal at this point is to create doubts in our minds, to create insecurities. And often that's easy because we already have doubts, don't we? We already have a measure of insecurity. We've already wondered at the beginning of this whole thing, can I pull this off? Am I the one to do this? Do I have what it takes to do it? I'm not sure I have what it takes to finish this. The critic, if we let them, will play on all of those fears and all of those insecurities. They will surface all of the doubts that you and I already have. we're already a little insecure anyway. We're already questioning ourselves anyway. And if we give ear to the voice of the critic, that will just grow, which is what happens. Look at verse 10. Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out, and there's so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. Also, our enemies said, notice now they're listening, before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them and will kill them and put an end to the work. Then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack us. Like this voice of doubt, this voice of fear, this voice of insecurity. It's starting to creep in among the people now. Maybe they're right. Maybe we can't do this. Maybe we should stop. Maybe they are going to attack us. Maybe this is going to end bad. Maybe we should just stop. All of those insecurities begin to surface. Now, verse 6 tells us what I think is an interesting piece of information. It tells us that they're at the halfway point. It says the wall had been built to the halfway point. So they're halfway through the job. I want to suggest that the halfway point is a really dangerous place. In any big project, in any big goal, maybe that God has called you to accomplish, the halfway point is a dangerous place because you're tired by the halfway point. Right? You've accomplished some, but you have a long way to go. There's that little voice in your head that goes, this looks really great. We have to do all of that work again to get finished. We got to double what we just did. We got to do the whole thing over again. We're halfway. And the temptation at the halfway point is to say, maybe we should stop here. Or to say, let's just take a little break. We've done good work. We got this far. Let's just take a little break. And a little break becomes a big break, becomes never getting back to finishing. The halfway point's, it's a tricky time. Especially when you add the voice of the detractors. You're never going to finish. You can't do this. You're not capable. Questioning your motives. When I did more running than I'm doing these days, I would do some longer races, and we have some others in our church who do half marathons and marathons. Some of the half marathons and marathons are called out and back races. And what that means is you run the first half out to a point, and then you turn around and you run the second half back to where you started. So it's out halfway and back halfway. And your brain does this dual thing when you get to the halfway point. Your brain says, yay, you're halfway. And then the other part of your brain goes, you can't do that again. You got to run all of that again. And your knees and your hips are starting to cry, right? That halfway point, there's this moment of exhilaration and then this moment of uncertainty. Maybe I can't finish this. Maybe I can't get all the way back. They're at the halfway point. And that's a dangerous place to be. So Nehemiah knows he's got to do something. He has to, as the leader, he has to respond. Look at what he does in verse 4. Hear us, our God, for we are despised. We're hearing from the critics. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders. When he's at the halfway point, when the energy is starting to sag, Nehemiah prays. Nehemiah prays. First thing he does. God, we need your help. In our own strength, we probably can't finish this. In our own strength, we're getting discouraged because we keep hearing the voice of the critic, the voice of the detractor. God, we need your help. We need you to deal with them. We need you to keep them back away from us. We need you to give us strength. When the voice of the critic is loud in your ear, you need to be praying. You need to be asking God to give you strength to be able to hear His voice above the voice of the critic. Nehemiah prays, but that's not all Nehemiah does. Nehemiah adjusted his plans, which is something every great leader does. Right? You have a plan at the beginning, you begin working, you get halfway in, and you realize, okay, we got to change a few things to be able to get to the goal. We've got to shift a few things around. So Nehemiah prays, but then Nehemiah begins to adjust his plans. Look at verse 9. But we prayed, so Nehemiah prays individually, and then he leads all of the people to pray. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. He prayed, but he posted a guard too. He prayed, he trusted God. He prayed, but he realized we need to be on the defensive against the attacks of the enemy. When you are hearing the voices of the critics, the voices of the detractors, you need to pray. Now, you definitely need to pray. But sometimes you have to post a guard too. Sometimes you have to decide, I'm going to put some space between me and that person because what they're doing is not healthy for me. It's not helping me. It's not encouraging to me. And yes, as I said, there are times we need to kind of wade through some criticism and find what's truth and what's false. But here's something to realize. There are critics who aren't trying to help you. All right, let me just say that. They're not trying to help you. They're not the wounds of a friend that the Proverbs writer writes about. They're not wounds of a friend people. They're trying to slow you down. They're trying to hurt you. You have to know there are some people who are not trying to help you. And when you encounter those, pray and post a guard. I'm going to put somebody between me and them. I'm going to put space between me and them. I'm going to keep them out of the sphere that I'm operating in because they're trying to harm what God is trying to do through me. Pray and post a guard. Another thing about Nehemiah and this change. The best leaders know they have to adjust course mid-project sometimes. We're not going to read it, but if you read on in chapter 4, you find Nehemiah making all of these adjustments. For example, he says, we're going to post watchmen where the wall is still low. Like wherever the gaps are, wherever the enemy could come through, we're going to put people right there so that the rest of the workers know, hey, somebody's watching. Somebody's looking for us. He divided them into two groups, and so while one group worked, the other group faced out towards the enemy and protected the city. Nehemiah knows we just need to make this shift. Everybody's nervous. Everybody's discouraged. We need to make this shift. We're going to have half of you work. We're going to have the other half look out. Those of you who are carrying materials from one place to the other, you're going to carry materials in one hand. You're going to carry a sword in the other hand. Everybody who's working is going to have a sword at their side the whole time they're working. This is what we're going to have to do to finish this project. He got a trumpet player. He said, if you hear the sound of the trumpet, stop what you're doing, run to where you heard the sound, and we'll defend the city. He came up with these strategies because he knew the critic was trying to steal what God was doing. He knew the critic was trying to tear down what God was trying to build, and he didn't want it to happen. He kept making these adjustments. One more thought. Nehemiah challenged the people to remember the Lord and remember the mission in the midst of fatigue of being halfway through, in the midst of discouragement at hearing the voices of the critics, in the midst of all of the doubts and insecurities of, can we do this? Should we do this? Is this the right thing? In the midst of all of that, Nehemiah stands up and says, don't forget why we started this. Don't forget how God told us to start this. This is verse 14. After I looked things over, and if you're a leader, you get that, right? Like, you don't just hit start and the whole plan works itself. You're constantly looking things over. After I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Remember why we started this in the first place. Back at the beginning of the series, if you were here the first week, I told you that one of the overarching themes of Nehemiah was identity. The people, because they had been in exile, because Jerusalem had been destroyed the whole time since they came back, they've been raising their kids in the rubble, because of the past 150 years, the people of Israel had forgotten who they were. They had forgotten they were the chosen people of a mighty God. And when Nehemiah stands up at this point, he's sort of struggling with it. He's fighting to help them remember who they are in God. You are the people of God, so stop listening to them. Don't be afraid of them. I know their voices are loud. I know their criticism is loud. I know their negativity is loud. I know they're trying to intimidate you. Don't be afraid of them. Stop listening to them, because your God is great and powerful. Your God is great and awesome. Your God is full of strength, and where we're weak, He's strong. And where we're discouraged, He has power. Stop listening to them. They don't speak for God. And remember why we started. Fight for your families, your sons and your daughters, your wives. Come on, this is why we started this. This was a noble endeavor that God called us to. So stop listening to the critics. God has this, and God has you, and God is powerful enough to make this happen. This has been a hard year. I know I've said it a lot. This has been a hard year on all of us, on people, on relationships, on families, on churches. This has been a hard year. The critics have been loud this year. The detractors have been loud this year. The distractions have been many this year. Don't listen to them. Your God is great and awesome. That is who you are in Christ through God. Don't listen to them. Don't listen to them. We live in a world that needs Jesus people right now. We live in a world that needs people committed to the compassion and grace of the kingdom of heaven, who won't listen to all the noise, who won't listen to all the criticism and all the detractors and all the people that say it can't be done. We need people to live for the kingdom, who believe their God is great and awesome. And they believe it enough to stop listening to the critics and stop listening to the detractors, because there's still a lot of work left to do. There's still a lot of wall left to build. Let's pray. I want to ask if today the critic is loud in your life, the detractor is loud in your life, the voice that keeps saying you can't, you won't, you shouldn't, it will never have, if that voice is loud in your life, and maybe it's coming from the outside, maybe there are people telling you that, maybe there are people around you that are telling you that, or maybe it's coming from the inside. Right? Some of us have that voice on the inside. We don't even need the outside voice, because inside there is a critic always saying, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you'll never be able to. Like, if that's you, from inside or outside, if you've been living with the voice of the critic lately, would you just lift your hand up and say, that's me. Like, I hear it a lot. I see it. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, God. We live in a time where it is so easy and popular to be the critic. It's so easy and popular to point out the faults of everybody else and everything else. And some in this room have been hearing those voices. Maybe it's come from people in their family. Maybe it's come from friends. Maybe it's come from people they work with. Maybe it's come from people in their organization. Maybe it's come from inside of themselves. Just that subtle voice that keeps accusing them, that keeps belittling them. May we hear the voice of Nehemiah today when he says, don't be afraid of them. Don't listen to them. Your God is great and awesome. The kingdom of God needs to grow, needs to expand on this earth. It needs to come to earth as it is in heaven through your people. And in order for us to do that, we're going to have to push back the voice of the critic that says, we're not the one, we're not good enough, we don't know enough about the Bible. We got to push that back and be the people you have called us to be. For you are great, and you are powerful, and you are awesome, and we want to live and build and move in that power.